With so much out there today, it can be hard to think of an idea that's genuinely surprising and original. There are thousands upon thousands of horror movies just one click away, so much so that what you're truly looking for can easily be buried below pages and pages of trash. It's always nice then to come across a monster that shocks you with its ingenuity, its execution, even its ability to take a classic concept and make it something enjoyable and not tired. There are plenty of shocking and horrific monsters out there, but most of the biggest ones you know already, so we're gonna try and show you something new. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 shocking horror movie monsters you've never heard of. 10. Paranormal Activity Next of Kin. The Basement Dweller. What number of Paranormal Activity movies are we on now? Like 8 to 10 maybe? I think that's why they started giving them names instead of numbers. They didn't want us to keep track. The latest one to hit our screens came in 2021 under the name Next of Kin. Chances are you've never heard of a single thing or person in this movie because nobody saw the damn thing. I think we all had better things to be doing and worrying about in 2021, but what you did miss out on if you didn't see the movie was one fantastic basement-bound terror. In the third act of the film, we get the pleasure of enduring a very tense traversal of the church's lower floor, complete with one gross-looking monster. We know that we're about to see something messed up, because by this point we've heard the demonic Asmodeus is in the mood for skin hopping. Just in time, we're met with the possessed Sarah, cutting a ghoulish skeletal silhouette in the torchlight. With her sunken eyes, bluish skin and gangly limbs, she really is a sight to behold. The Paranormal Activity films may not be great these days, but you cannot go wrong with a classic foe like that. 9. The Snake Man. I'm really not sure how I feel about SSSSS's onomatopoeic title, but I sure feel good about the movie's slippery monsters. Bear in mind that monsters don't always have to be the bad guys. Look at Frankenstein's monster, for instance. He was just a product of his environment, of his unfortunate situation. It wasn't his fault. Similarly, the snake men of SSSS didn't ask to be snake men, but nonetheless became these monsters. The victims of a crazy scientist, 2 men are injected with serum that slowly transforms them into snakes. Their skin becomes scaly and pale, their mouths flat and wide. They sit confidently in that zone of being horrific, but also just not quite bad enough to reassure us that it's normal to be this creeped out. There's something quite tragic about the appearance of the snake men too, but I guess in reality, would being a snake be that bad? Sitting in a nice warm vivarium all day, being fed free food? I mean, that life is better than most of us have it. 8. The Phantom of Regular Size. The Pre-Iron Man. Now, if this was just a list of shocking monsters, then Tetsuo Iron Man would be a great one to mention, given the monstrous outcome of the Central Man's transition into part man, part machine that sees him kill his girlfriend with his drill penis. With the caveat that these need to be more obscure monsters though, we can eliminate that right away because we here at What Culture Horror love a bit of Tetsuo. Well, even if you're familiar with the aforementioned mechanical monster, chances are you're not aware of the short film made as an experimental precursor to the feature. Shinya Tsukamoto, before going big, wanted to try out a few things first, and so he created The Phantom of Regular Size, an 18-minute short horror film exploring the same general gist as we see in the feature. Filmed on 8mm, the overall look of the film and its metal-bound monsters is far grittier and less refined. It's really very cool to be able to watch and compare the short to the feature it eventually gave way to, and though the special effects wouldn't hold up today, they never lose their dated charm. 7. The Seed, the Meteoric Monster. Most of the time, shocking horror monsters are shocking because they're so horrifying to look at. They're bloody, beastly, huge and hulking or hauntingly eerie. There are so many ways a film's monster can surprise you, but not all the surprises are along those lines. In a list full of terrifying, horrible looking monsters, the last thing you would expect is just a little guy. A friendly looking, slightly slimy, tiny friend who could lull you into a false sense of security. Indeed, doing exactly that to the protagonist of The Seed. The monster in question falls from the sky during a meteor shower, greeting our central girls looking like nothing more than a wounded animal. It cries and cries until one girl, Charlotte, takes pity and brings it inside, thus bringing about all of their downfalls. The thing is tiny but mighty, able to absorb and hypnotize Charlotte's friends. Before we know it, her friends are developing monstrous qualities too, vomiting black blood, bloating as if they're about to explode, going a bit rabid, a bit feral. It turns out that this little beast is capable of a hell of a lot, and seeing the meteors raining down at the film's finale, we realise that he's actually just one soldier in a shockingly large army. 6. TEKETEKE, a legless wonder. I'm inclined to believe that ghosts are capable of floating and thus having no legs isn't really such an inconvenience. Well, TEKETEKE is here to prove me wrong. The film is based on a real Japanese urban legend about a ghost missing the lower half of her body after falling onto a railway line and being bisected by a train. The film opts to change her backstory slightly to make it even worse, but the basics stay the same. She's a vengeful spirit, and she lurks around in the streets and near train stations waiting to claim the lives of those who come into her path. As far as urban legends go, this is a pretty good one. It has all the elements you need. It's got a catchy name, a simple backstory, a motive for killing, and a creepy associated sound. Like the Babadook has Baba Duk Duk Duk, she has the scratch of her hauling her body across the pavement, getting louder as she gets closer. The film even goes as far as to up the stakes a bit, adding a new bit of lore in that if you survive a chase from TEKETEKE, you will die 3 days later. Her appearance is striking, her lore is bang on, and frankly, I think she's a criminally underused idea. You may never have heard of her before because her film appearances aren't exactly award-worthy, but I bet you're glad you know now. 5. The Manor. Very, very old people. There are certain folks out there who just find the elderly unnerving. Maybe it's something about being reminded of your own mortality, or the constant fear of losing one's sense of independence and autonomy. Or maybe it's because sometimes old people can be kind of freaky on purpose. Part of the Welcome to Blumhouse anthology for Prime Video, The Manor revolves around a care home with a dark secret. Protagonist Judith is moved into the home following a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, but she soon becomes suspicious over the deaths of her fellow residents, and an ominous figure she sees looming in her quarters. You would think that this would be a classic case of a vengeful spirit, perhaps the ghost of an elderly person who died here earlier due to mistreatment or neglect. Instead, the film takes a very different turn, something more akin to The Witches than The Ring. The monsters here are a ring of witches, topping up their life forces by sucking the life out of the care home's residents. Every night they get to enjoy their youth again before shrinking back down into their elderly bodies at sunrise. And the biggest shock of all, Judith decides to join them. 4. The Incredible Melting Man. The Melting Fella. I feel the title sort of ruins the surprise in this one, but hear me out anyway. Who watching this can honestly say that they've seen 1977's The Incredible Melting Man? Not many people, that's my guess, which means most of you haven't heard of him till now. It's a simple but effective premise, combining sci-fi, body horror, and zombie-esque ideas all into one lovely gooey package. The melting man in question is an astronaut who developed this rather unfortunate condition on returning home from a flight to Saturn. It turns out that during his trip he was exposed to radiation that has caused his body to start melting from the outside in, now driving him to commit a series of murders in order to consume human flesh and survive. There are a lot of things to fear when going on a trip to space, but usually these fears include, I don't know, getting stuck in the great nothing, or maybe encountering scary aliens who want to harvest your organs. Melting because of a bit of space UV is definitely a new one on me. 3. The Borderlands. The building is the monster. Buildings and structures can be scary in a haunted way or a physically uncomfortable way. They make you fear them because of what they contain or the way they could contain you. Think the sort of fear the Overlook Hotel would give you versus the Nutty Putty Cave. And if you don't know that last one, seriously, don't Google it. What buildings usually can't bank on making them scary is their personality or their malicious nature. And that is because, obviously, buildings aren't sentient. Imagine the shock and surprise then when audiences reached the end of the British horror The Borderlands and found that the movie's central church has been the baddie all along. It seems that the building has a life of its own, something ancient and pagan. It's no use doing cleansings or exorcisms, there's no ghost or demon here to expel and restore the church's sanctity. The whole thing is just rotten. Our protagonists meet their grueling demise as they crawl into a small passage, attempting to follow the third member of their team. As soon as they're inside, this passage closes behind them and begins to move, contracting and flexing its membranous constitution. They die screaming as this ghastly structure dissolves them with acid, swallowing them into its dark belly. If that isn't a shock outcome, I don't know what is. 2. VHS 94. Ratma. Oh, and who could forget dear Rat Boy? Storm Drain, one story in VHS 94's lineup, puts him front and centre as the overlord of the sewers, a privileged position indeed for a cryptid of his standing. We're introduced to Ratma, the little rat man in question, after a journalist and cameraman are abducted in the city's sewers. Ratma is a grotesque half-man, half-rat with hypnotic abilities. He can brainwash people into worshipping him as their god, passing on the message of Hail Ratma to anyone that'll listen. In classic horror fashion, there's a good amount amount of vomiting mysterious black liquid, because that's always effective. A nice addition in this case though is that Ratmer and his followers took a leaf out of Jeff Goldblum's book, in that their vomit is highly corrosive and great for killing or maiming people with. Overall, he's a pretty great cryptid, and you have to respect a guy that builds an empire from the underground up. Hail Ratmer, I say. 1. Mimic, the Judas breed. Giant bugs are a concept that's kind of gone out of fashion. We used to get all sorts of nature fights back horrors or mutant insect stories, but they just don't seem to be doing it anymore. Back in 1997 though, it seems the public still had an appetite for big old creepy crawlies. The story sees scientists engineer a cross between a mantis and a termite in order to eradicate disease-spreading bugs from the city, naming this new creation the Judas breed. Their plan relies on the engineered bugs being unable to sustain life and population growth, eventually dying off after the job is done. Unfortunately, they didn't account for the survival and evolution of the Judas breed, meaning that everyone was in for quite a shock when they started turning up in relation to a series of disappearances a few years later. We get a few glimpses of what appears to be a shadowy bloke in a trench coat. Perhaps the guy who's been keeping the bugs alive, we think. Maybe the one that's been spreading them about. Imagine our surprise then when this man emerges from the darkness to reveal that he's instead a giant bug, like a bug the size of a tall, bulky man. I know logically we're meant to be rooting for the humans in this story, but truly, we all love an underdog, don't we? And with that, we've reached the end of this list of 10 shocking horror movie monsters you've never heard of. What are some movie monsters that you're convinced nobody else knows but you? Tell us about them in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.